I'd like to tell you a story that relates to the human factors framework model that is very personal to me. I call it Christine's story. The man in the picture is Albert William Hopton. On the morning of May 1st, 1962, A.W., as his friends and business acquaintances called him, left his home in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, took a short drive to the Westmount Country Club, and joined some friends for a round of golf. After the game, he came home, had lunch with his wife Marjorie, and then went outside to tend to the roses in their garden. Sometime later in the afternoon, he was discovered lying by the flower beds. He had died as a result of a sudden cardiac event. Although his passing at age 64 was a tragic event for his family, it was not unexpected. Young Albert had suffered from rheumatic fever as a child, and the disease had permanently damaged his young heart. Doctors had warned A.W. that this damage would ultimately end his life prematurely, and unfortunately, their prediction had been correct. 300 miles away in Ottawa, A.W.'s youngest daughter, Carol, received the news of her father's passing. She was asked to return home as soon as possible to be by her mother's side and help to arrange for the funeral. But before she and her husband could begin the long car trip to Waterloo to look after her grieving mother, she would need to arrange care for her own 3 children. For the 2 oldest, Larry, age 5, and Susan, age 3, there was an easy solution. They would stay with her husband's family. The youngest son, however, was going to be a problem. He was just over 1 year old and had recently come down with some sort of cold or flu. The family doctor, who had made a house call earlier that day, had advised continued bed rest and observation for the infant, and was concerned enough about his condition that he had promised to return to check on the boy the next day as well. Desperately needing someone who could come to her home and stay with her baby, Carol telephoned Christine, a young woman who sometimes looked after her children. Christine had originally come to Ottawa from South America to act as the nanny for the family of an ambassador. When the diplomat and his family eventually returned home, Christine decided to stay on in Ottawa and become a Canadian citizen. Always fond of children, she had continued to work part-time as a babysitter. Over the phone, Carol outlined the situation, and Christine immediately agreed to come and stay in the house and look after the sick child until the funeral was over and Carol could return to Ottawa. With the baby asleep in his crib, Carol and Christine quickly reviewed expectations and a short list of emergency numbers. Then, Carol joined the rest of the family in the car and began the long drive to Waterloo. Shortly after the taillights had disappeared down the road, Christine went into the nursery to check on the sick child. She reached down into the crib and gently lifted the sleeping boy. As she tilted his head slightly so that she could cradle him in her arms, the infant awoke suddenly and began crying out in pain. Christine immediately suspected that his illness was far more serious than Carol or even the family doctor had assumed. Although she had no formal medical training herself, when Christine had worked as a nanny in the consulate, one of the ambassador's young children had developed spinal meningitis. She had learned that one of the early symptoms of this deadly disease is unusual pain associated with movement of the head and neck. She had heard these same cries of pain before from a child in her care. She also knew that although the disease could be fatal, it was curable if diagnosed and treated at an early stage. Time was the critical factor. So, what was Christine to do? What would you have done? In an age before cell phones, she couldn't phone the baby's parents on the road and ask for their advice. The family doctor had just examined the child and had not recommended taking him to the hospital. The easiest course of action would be to do nothing. She was, after all, just a babysitter, just a newcomer to Canada, not a medical expert. What did she know? The doctor had promised to check in on the child sometime the next day. Why not wait? Instead, Christine picked up the phone, called the family doctor, and demanded that he return immediately to check on the baby in her care. A short time later, Christine, the doctor, and the baby arrived at the Ottawa hospital where a diagnosis of spinal meningitis was confirmed. Early treatment saved the boy's life. Early treatment almost 60 years ago saved my life. So, why did I share this story? It's an interesting set of coincidences. My grandfather's death ultimately saving my life. But what does Christine's story have to do with safety or leadership? All too often, when a serious injury or fatality occurs at work, we hear, after the fact, that it was predictable. Someone or some group of individual employees knew it was just a matter of time. But instead of speaking up, they said nothing. Why? I'm guessing that some of them thought to themselves, I'm just an employee. I'm new to this company. I'm not a safety expert. What do I know? I'm sure our safety management system will take care of it eventually. Why not wait? Like Christine, our employees are often aware of the leading indicators that precede these tragedies. They just don't feel empowered to communicate their concerns to managers, supervisors, or fellow employees. And all too often, when those confident enough to speak up actually voice their concerns, they're dismissed because they're not safety professionals. What do they know? I'm sure glad my family doctor didn't display the same professional arrogance on the night Christine called him. As leaders, we need to understand that speaking up like Christine did is hard. In the workplace, we will need to take a proactive role in encouraging, gathering, and communicating ideas and leading indicators from the shop floor. Opening up communication starts with you, and that communication starts with listening. Only when individuals believe that their voice is heard and their input is valuable will they begin to share what they know. And that flow of information will improve organizational learning and help to build a culture of safety, trust, and respect. And, as I know from personal experience, it might also just save someone's life.